Welcome to our Sound for Video session. It's the 30th of March, 2017. Recording this one remotely, which is why I'm using the just the earbud headset here, but the show must go on. We had a number of questions come in. Let's take a look at those. First one from Nick Laws. Hey, Curtis, I've been working on a small corporate project as well as short films. I'm using a pretty simple setup Tascam DR70D with a boom mic, and I'd like to be able to monitor the sound with my headphones and also send a feed to the director. I'm sure this gets done on larger productions, but I'm wondering how. Is it just a simple headphone splitter adapter? Do higher end mixers, recorders have multiple headphone outputs? Then to wirelessly send the audio, would you just use something like a Rode Link or other wireless mic setup? All right, first question. So Nick, yes, the DR70D in fact has multiple outputs. So no, you don't need a splitter of any sort. Just over here on Tascam's website, it talks here about the output connector. So you have a line out, you have a camera out, and you have the headphone out. So you actually have three different outputs. To wirelessly send, you might actually, depending on the wireless system you're using, and we did have a previous session where we talked about using a Senheiser G3 wireless system as a wireless feed for a director. In that case, I believe you'd use a line out. You could also use the camera out. You should be able to use a camera out with a Rode Link. That would allow you to go, this is essentially a mic level output at minus 40 dBV, and then you can send that to over the Rode Link. So you'd have the transmitter connected to the DR70D from the camera out, and then the director would take the receiver and hook up headphones to that. So that's one way you could do it, but yeah, generally you're not going to use splitters out of the headphone outs. You're going to use one of these other outputs. In the DR70D's case, you could actually send audio to the camera, and if the director is right there at the camera and there's a headphone out on the camera, you could certainly use that. There are lots of different options you could use, but your DR70D has all the output options you need there, so you're in pretty good shape. I'll put a link to that previous session where we talked about using the Senheiser G3. Second question, what's your policy for notifying the director of distracting sound issues if the actors are in the middle of a take and there's a sound issue? Should you speak up immediately or wait to tell the director after the take so the actors don't lose their focus? That's a question I'd ask the director. Different directors like to work different ways. I had a piece where we had some sound issues come up. It was actually a documentary film. We were doing the interview portion of that. And since it was an interview and it was going to just go on and the sound was persisting, I went ahead and told the director right away. I looked at him and gave him the timeout signal. He put the interview on hold and we went and solved the sound issue. Again, it was a kid running around outside blowing some horn. And so the director sent out a production assistant out to talk to the family and the kid and see if they could hold off on blowing the horn until we were done with the interview. And they kindly obliged. So it depends on the situation, but if up front, I would ask the director if that opportunity arises. If not, if it's going to be a really long take, it probably does make sense in a lot of cases to call it before you have to go through that whole take. If it's a short take, you could probably just wait until the actors are done, just so you don't take them out of their zone, so to speak. So hopefully that's helpful. Thanks, Nick. Great questions. Next one up is from Michael. For one of your next sessions, can you discuss the best way to mix two lavalier mics when two people are sitting next to each other? Basically, think of two talking heads sitting next to each other. Some specific questions. Since there's the potential for phase issues, do you need to deal with this somehow? The answer to that is yes. Also, do you recommend pulling down the levels of one mic while the other person is talking? I think that depends. And if you're doing a really high quality job, I think the answer is yes. Or will that sound too choppy? If you do it right, no, it won't sound too choppy. Note that there won't be any background music or ambient noise tracks to smooth out noticeable changes in levels. You should always get some room tone when you're recording in that type of situation so that you can smooth that out and you won't need to rely on music or anything else. Now, you say you won't have any ambient noise tracks. I'm not sure I understand why there wouldn't be any. Again, almost always you want to get those if you can. If there's some reason you can't, well, yes, what I generally do is I will automate the two tracks. So presumably you're recording the two people to two separate tracks. If you were mixing live, what I would ideally do is actually use the faders while you're actually doing the interview or whatever it is, the talking heads. And I would actually use the faders to attenuate the one who's not talking and boost the one that is, or at least have it to 0 dB or wherever it's right for the mix, and then switch it back and forth as they take turns. Now that's tricky in situations where it's less scripted, and especially if it's a really engaging conversation where they're going back and forth a lot. But if it's a piece where they're not going back and forth too often, you can use the faders to do that while you're actually recording. I would also recommend you still record isolated tracks so that you can go back to those if you mess up the mix somehow. If you forget to, push the fader back up when someone starts talking, or you just happen to miss it because they surprised you and went back and forth quicker than you expected. So ideally, if you can do the live mix while you're doing the recording, then you're in good shape. You have less work to do in post potentially. So those are some thoughts. Yes, you will definitely potentially get phasing issues. You won't definitely get them. You most likely will get them because the two people are different distances from the mics, or the mics are different distances from the sound sources. So yes, you'll get some phase issues. So if you don't do it during the recording itself, then you basically do the same thing in post, and you use what's called track automation, track automation or clip gain, either way. And what you do is essentially the same thing. That's probably a bigger discussion than we can do right here, but yes, that's generally the idea. And that's what mixing is all about. So good questions. I would highly recommend, if there's any way at all, to get room tone before or after the take. I think here you call them ambient noise tracks. I would definitely try to get some of those because those are going to help you if you run into any issues where you have to completely cut one of the mics or the others. Now, you don't necessarily have to cut them entirely. You can just attenuate them so that it won't sound as unnatural moving back and forth between them. But it's always good to have that room tone track in case you do have to. So thanks for the question, Michael. Next question, William Hollingsworth. Curtis, my question this week is more general than usual and has to do with my first time on set. Do you have any suggestions for a first-time boom op? I've been a recordist for 2 years now, so I both mix and boom on small sets here in North Alabama. However, I just got my first SAG film crew to start in late April as a boom op. What suggestions do you have that might help me do a better job and not get yelled at? Thanks, William. That's a good question, William. For those that aren't familiar with SAG, that's a Screen Actors Guild. So this is a union job, in other words. SAG, it used to be just the Screen Actors Guild. In 2012, it looks like. They actually merged with the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. So it's now SAG AFTRA. So for those that weren't aware, that's a union. So congratulations, William. I have never shot on a union job, so I don't know, but I've shot on what I would definitely call small crew jobs. So usually that's going to include a director, potentially several producers, a DP, sound, at least one sound person. In most of the cases I've worked on, there's only ever been one sound person, and that was me. Although I've actually worked on one fairly recently with my friend, and in that case, I was actually just a production assistant because I just wanted the experience for this particular job. So in any case, it was Scott Vanderbilt, and we shot out in Salt Lake City here for a job. But in any case, I would say a couple of things. Number one, and these are really basic and you probably already know them, but some things to consider. On some jobs that I've been on, sometimes the director will want to get some insert shots or some B-roll where they don't want any sound. So they're shooting MOS or without sound. And in those cases, a couple cases, they asked me to stand in. They just wanted to help get focus for a particular interview they were going to do later on. And actually they were shooting some plates, I think. And by that I mean they were shooting inside of a stadium, in an indoor stadium. And what they wanted to do was get the same depth of field they were going to have, and they could composite one of the people in if they had to. Kind of an interesting idea. So they had me stand in just to get the focus and then get out of the way, and they could shoot a plate, 30 or 60 seconds of that particular place. And that was fine. I was happy to do that. And then what happened was when they, were done getting focused and they asked me to step away, I stepped out of what I thought was the frame, but it turned out I got back in the frame again and they had to ask me to get out. So just be really cognizant of where you're standing if you're in a situation like that where they're shooting B-roll or without sound for whatever reason, that you stay out of the frame and stay out of the way. And that's just a basic one. Another thing I think is just as a mindset to go in with the willingness to help the whole team. Don't do whatever you can to avoid setting up a us versus them or me versus you or any of that kind of thing. If someone needs help, a camera operator is having trouble getting a screw loose on his rig or something, if you happen to have a tool that can help him, offer. Usually for the sound people on bigger sets, the gaffer and the director of photography will dominate the set as you guys are getting set up, and they'll want you just out of the way. And then once they get everything set up, then you have to find a place to boom from. And they don't want you to mess up their lighting situation. So usually it's the mixers. Well, I guess it depends on the set, but oftentimes it'll be the mixer that would interface with the director of photography or the assistant director or whomever to kind of negotiate if that needs to be done. Like, hey, where are we going to put our boom up, without getting a shadow from the lighting, so on and so forth. So you just have to be sensitive to those types of things. Just figure out, working with your mixer, figure out what the line of authority is for that particular job and make sure you just respect that. So those are some thoughts there. If you're not intimately familiar, and I'm assuming you are, but if you're not intimately familiar with all of the different crew members on a bigger shoot like that, there is an app. I'll put the link for it down below. I don't remember what it's called at the moment, but I do have it on my phone. But it gives you the names, all the different names that are often used on larger crews of the different crew members and what they do. So that's really helpful to just review that, just to make sure you have a good understanding of all the different people you'll encounter, where they fit in the hierarchy, and again, just do your best to to work well with all of them. It's all one big team, so good luck, William, and congratulations. That's pretty exciting. Hope that works out well. All right, next question, Jeff Barnes. Hello, Curtis. Thank you for your helpful equipment reviews and your concise real-world recording techniques and descriptions. I purchased the Zoom F8 per your review, and I have a couple of questions. First, I'm using a Senheiser EW100 G3 and G2 wireless microphones to cover a 6-speaker panel discussion. I'm wondering about the sensitivity settings recommendations for transmitters and receivers. By the way, the G3 seems more sensitive. On the G3, I have the transmitter setting at -18 dB and receiver AF out at -12. Sorry, I forgot to write down the zoom setting, but I think it was at 20 to 30 on the dial. So my question is about the AF out settings and what they should be and recommended sensitivity level for the transmitter. Is it best on the wireless microphones to set the sensitivity the highest before peaking and then backing them off, then fine-tune with the zoom controls, or have the wireless mics at a certain output and sensitivity level and adjust with the zoom controls higher? I think that's an interesting question and something I've been experimenting with a little bit. I don't have necessarily a definitive answer, but I think -18 is generally going to be a little on the hot side for most voices, so I'd probably back off and give yourself a little bit more headroom. I think the default setting on the G3 was -23 dB, and I usually stay closer to that. Unless you have an extraordinarily soft speaker, I usually go a little bit lower. That way you give yourself a little headroom so it's not going to clip at the transmitter itself. So that's the first thing I'd probably recommend. I wouldn't run it quite so hot on the G3. Now the G2 I don't have direct experience with, so that one may differ a little bit, but again, just consider leaving yourself some headroom. Again, when you put it on and have the person talk for a bit, I almost always start at -23 on the G3 and then have the person start talking to them on a, let them know I'm trying to get levels. I need them to talk at the same level they intend to talk when they're, doing their acting or whatever it is. And, I usually have a set of interview questions ready for them, just basic stuff like, what'd you have for breakfast? Or is this your first time here to such and such, or whatever it is, so on and so forth. So just engage them a little bit, get them talking, and take a listen. But usually, again, I start at -23. For the G2, that's going to be a little different if it's not quite as sensitive. So again, AF out on the receiver, I would go with the default setting. Just reset the unit and start there. That's usually their best bet. And then I would try to do more of the gaining from just adjusting the Zoom F8 from there to again, to leave yourself, I would say 12 to 15 dB of headroom. So get your peaks hitting about -15 or 18, somewhere around there, depending on how dynamic these people generally get. I find that even with 6-panel interviews or panel discussions, that a lot of times laughter is the biggest challenge, and people get surprisingly louder than talking when they laugh. So leaving plenty of headroom is definitely advised. All right. Also, when I monitor the Zoom recorder, it's very confusing with multiple microphones, especially at the start of the discussion. People are amped up and louder than normal, plus there is spill from all the microphones. If I select the PFL button, does that mute all other channels except the one that is selected? The answer is yes. That's how it works. That is what I did, and it seems like that is what happened, but I'm confused if that's what happened. Yes, that is what happened. So I guess what I'm asking, is there a channel mute on the F8? I would like to isolate the individual speaker at times to make sure that my level is correct. Yeah, that's exactly what the PFL button's for. In fact, let's switch back over here from the Zoom F8 manual. You have two different options for the PFL button. You can have it act as a pre-fader listen. That's when it's set to PFL. So if you go to the menu, input, PFL mode, you can change the mode for each individual input. And your two options are PFL or solo. PFL is listening to the microphone before the fader. So if you're mixing all 6 of those people, then what PFL mode does is it lets you listen to that individual microphone with all the others muted. Well, it does not technically muting them. It's just making it so you can't hear them in your headphones. It's still recording them. But what that does is it just plays that one channel, and it plays it before the fader. So if you have the fader pulled way down, that's not going to affect what you're hearing in your headphones. The other mode is solo, which is a post-fader mode. So that does the same thing. If for your headphones, just for your headphones, it mutes all the other channels and lets you hear the sound after the fader. So if you pulled the fader way down, you're not going to hear a whole lot. But if you push the fader back up, you're going to hear more. So those are the two different modes. I personally generally leave it in PFL mode because I want to make sure that I don't have the gain pushed too hard and I'm not clipping on the input. So that's usually the mode that I use, although you can change to solo if it makes sense for the particular situation that you're in. So good questions on that. And thanks, Jeff. Good luck. All right, next question is from Gen. A few questions. When considering which preamp to use between different options, how do you choose? For instance, I have a Rode Video Mic Pro and the BeachTech DXA Micro Pro. Both can amplify. Should I prefer one over the other in all situations? Well, again, first of all, the Rode Video Mic Pro is interesting because it has its own preamplifier and amplifier, well, preamplifier built in. So I don't really see a need if you're using the Rode Video Mic Pro to also use the BeachTech necessarily. If the only reason I could see for that is if you needed some way to monitor and your camera didn't have a headphone jack, then yeah, I guess you could use both the Video Mic Pro and the BeachTech together. So the Video Mic Pro routed into the BeachTech, BeachTech routed into the camera. But in terms of amplification, I don't think there's really any benefit there. The Rode Video Mic Pro's amplifier is actually pretty decent, and I don't think you would get anything better with the BeachTech by plugging it into the BeachTech. So that would be my take on that particular situation. Second question, I am considering between the NTG4 Plus and the Deity for my first XLR shotgun. I'm leaning towards the Rode for its flexibility due to the battery, as both seem to sound pretty good. Is there anything else I'm overlooking? That's a trade-off. It depends on what you want in particular. The Rode NTG4 Plus is good. It's better at isolating the sound. So if there's sound in the particular space where you're recording, as long as it's not a lot of reverb. But if you're going to be recording somewhere outside for a recording and there's a fair bit of noise around in the surrounding area, I think the NTG4 Plus will probably do a better job of isolating the dialogue that you're trying to capture from the person, assuming you get it up nice and close to them. The Deity, but the downside on the NTG4 Plus to me is that it sounds a little bit thin. It has a sort of a mid-range hyped sound. It's not horrible, and if you like the sound of it, it's totally fine. But for me, there are a lot of other mics that sound warmer and generally more flattering on more people's voices. The Deity, for example, I think sounds a little better to my personal ears. But the downside on the Deity is it's not as tight a pickup pattern, and it's not as good at rejecting sound from the back of the mic. So it's a trade-off between those two. I think if you like the sound of the NTG4 Plus, that's probably the one I would choose. So if you prefer the sound of the Deity and you're willing to live with a little bit more, a little bit less focused pickup pattern, and you're okay with picking up a little bit more of the ambiance, then I think the Deity is a better choice. So hopefully that's helpful for you. Thanks for the question again. All right, next question is from Kevin Edwards. Hi, Curtis. I'm a sound recording enthusiast. I have a question regarding radio options that are within the enthusiast budget. I don't, or should say I haven't done paid work as it's purely my hobby. Now at present, I have a couple of Senheiser EW100 G3 systems and have just picked up a Rodelink filmmaker set. I'm also looking at the new Rodelink News Shooter set, which enables you to power a microphone requiring 48 volts at the end of a boom. So my question is, are there other options out there, either new or secondhand, that are worthy of contemplating with a budget of only £600, and why? As always, thank you for your time and resource and making yourself available. So Kevin, that gets a good question. I don't know that there's anything that's loads better at that price, because that's about the price range of the actually I'm not sure what the Sennheiser runs in pounds. I thought it was a little bit more than that. Probably used you could get one for £600, although I guess we've seen that those currencies change a bit now, so I'm really not sure the current pricing. The Rodelink is I can tell you what it is in US terms, USD terms. So Rodelink is about $400 USD. Senheiser G3 is about $630 USD. In that same price range, Audio-Technica has their System 10 wireless system, which I have not personally used, but others that I've talked to who have used it, I believe it's also a digital system, so it's more like the Rodelink. People said they're very happy with the results. I think it probably comes, if I had to guess, and based on the sound tests I've heard, the Audio-Technica System 10 comes with a better lavalier microphone than the Rodelink does. I'm not really in love with the lavalier that comes with the Rodelink. It's okay, but it's not amazing. So anyway, I guess those are my thoughts there. Are there any other systems in that price range? I don't know of any that are really great. A little on the higher price end is a Sennheiser AVX, which is also a digital system, which I was very impressed with when I used it. It's particularly good for cases where, for like solo shooters that don't really have an extra hand and ear to manage sound really heavily, because they're also operating camera. So that's a good option, but I think it's a little out of that price range. And then once you get beyond that, there are Sony systems, and then of course you get into things like Electrosonics, which are way more expensive than that. So I think at that price range, I don't know of anything that's like worlds better than the Sennheiser or the Rodelinks in terms of quality. So unfortunately, the only one that I'm really kind of familiar with is that Audio-Technica System 10. So we'll put a link for that down below if you're interested in looking at that. All right, and then I believe this is the final question here. Mohammed asks, I'm considering a stereo mic for ambiance recording in nature, occasionally concerts. Bought the Rode Stereo Video Mic Pro, plugged into the camera, played with the settings, but couldn't hear any dramatic difference. So I thought I should finally buy a separate recorder. Here are the questions. Do you recommend the Tascam DR40 for a beginner or something else in the price range? I would say, Mohammed, that is not my favorite recorder, not because it's not good, or it wasn't good at the time that it was introduced, but at this point it's kind of aged, and in terms of just the preamps are a little bit on the noisy side. So, whether you use the XLR or the built-ins, actually I don't know as much about the built-in, but the XLR inputs on that are not very clean. So I would probably save up for something a little bit more if you want something with a little bit cleaner preamp. This is tricky because this is where you start to get pricier very, very quickly. You could get a Tascam DR60D Mark II, but it doesn't have built-in microphones, because that's what your next question, it looks like, is going to be about. I don't know what you're looking for exactly. If you need something that has built-in microphones, I would probably look at one of the Zoom recorders. Tascam has their new DR100 Mark III, and that looks really nice, but I think it's $400 US, so it's a little on the pricier side. Definitely pricier than Tascam DR40, but I think that would be a much better recorder. So I would probably look at the Zoom H4n Pro, which is roughly, it's going to be more expensive even than the Tascam DR40, but not that much more. So again, you're recording nature and concerts, so there's a thought. I'm not a huge fan of the DR40 at this point, just because its preamps are a little on the noisy side. Second question, since the recorder already has a stereo mic built in, wouldn't it make more sense to record the ambiance directly with the built-in mic rather than plugging a Rode stereo video mic in the recorder? Yeah, I think probably so. Especially since I haven't tested if there is a 3.5 millimeter mic input on the DR40. I'm not even 100% sure on that. But generally my finding has been that the 3.5 mil inputs on Tascam devices are not that great. They're usually quite noisy. So yeah, I would probably just use the inbuilt microphones. Especially, you added to that question, especially considering the Stereo Video Mic Pro can only record up to 40 kilohertz and Tascam up to 96 kilohertz. You're talking, I'm not sure you're comparing the same thing there. The 40 kilohertz is usually the frequency range, the frequency of sounds you can record. The Tascam 96 kilohertz refers to a sample rate, which is different. So those are two separate things. So don't get confused between those. I wouldn't be concerned about that. I think the Stereo Video Mic Pro and the Tascam's built-in microphones are probably pretty close in terms of quality. I haven't specifically tested the Tascam DR40 built-in mics, but in any case, be careful with that. I would, at that price range, I would save up just a little bit more and look at the Zoom H4n Pro, the new version, or the H5. All right, hope that was helpful for you. I think that was our last question for this week. Yes, indeed it was. So hope everyone's having a great week out there, learning lots of new things. Thanks for the questions, and we'll talk to you again next week.